Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is back in what I would argue is its most accessible form ever, and as a result, you have a lot of new fans coming into it for the first time, and old players who decided to come back now that one of their favorite games is back on the menu. And as such, I figured it was a good idea to put together some beginner tips and returning player tips to help ease everyone into the game and experience what is, in my opinion, one of the best games to come out in the franchise. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including coverage of the Fire Emblem franchise as a whole, alongside other turn-based strategy RPGs and the like, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. We have a lot of tips and things to discuss here, 18-ish, depending on how you want to count it actually, so no major preamble here. Let's just jump in with what is kind of less of a tip and more of a heads up, really. Normal mode in Path of Radiance is very easy, and I would highly recommend that any experienced Fire Emblem or turn-based strategy fan start on hard mode. There's really not much more to say about this than that. It's just Path of Radiance is really easy, man, and you're only really going to feel like you're playing a strategy RPG that makes you want to actually think if you decide to play on hard mode. Maniac mode if you have access to the Japanese version of the game, but as far as I'm aware, that is not what has been uploaded to Nintendo Switch Online, so keep that in mind. You will absolutely snooze your way through normal mode if you have any idea what you're doing in a game like this. Number two, and this is one that should not be surprising for any long-term Fire Emblem fans, but it bears repeating anyway. Titania is a powerhouse unit at the start of the game, but you should use her sparingly due to the way she sucks up XP. That does not mean, however, that you should be afraid to use her. Titania, for those of you who do not know, is a character that falls into the overall archetype of the Jagan, a long-standing tradition in the Fire Emblem franchise, oftentimes but not always a paladin or the equivalent mounted cavalry character who is massively higher level and much more powerful than the rest of your team at the start of the game. As such, they're a bit of a crutch unit that allows you to deal with difficult enemies or clusters of enemies that you can't quite deal with the rest of your party, soften up opponents so that you can wind up getting kills on them and get more XP with your weaker characters to get them leveled up. That sort of deal. They're your escort. Titania, for those who know the franchise, is more of an Oife or maybe a Seth, a character who starts very strong and then doesn't ever really fall off if you decide to use her throughout the entirety of the game. Will she be as strong as the rest of your trained up characters by the time you hit endgame? No, but she'll certainly still be useful, and that's why I recommend that you don't be afraid of using her. You just don't want to use her to clear the entire map for the first half of the game. Let her get some XP here and there. She'll get a few levels just kind of passively from using her as part of your party. You're not going to screw yourself over by letting her get some kills or finishing off some decently powerful enemies, especially if it means like getting a powerful item or just not killing them at all and the XP not going to anyone. Like, that's just a waste. So feel free to use Titania. Don't overuse her. Let the rest of your party get some XP, and you'll find that she stays as a very reliable character through the whole game. Speaking of leveling and how to use characters, let's talk about Ike for a second. The hero, the protagonist, the main lord of Path of Radiance, he's a very feast or famine type character, depending on what stat growths he gets early on, but regardless of how strong or weak he is, he needs to be deployed for every single map, and you do lose if he dies. Combined with the fact that if he does actually get good growths, or you do pamper him a little bit, he can be one of your strongest characters, and it is worthwhile to maybe give him a little preferential treatment if needed earlier in the game. If you give him some bonus XP, or forge a good sword for him, maybe you use a Seraph Robe to give him some extra HP, or a Speed Wing if he doesn't wind up getting quite as much speed growth as you would like, it's not the end of the world because you have to use him regardless, right? Given that his promotion allows him to access the extremely powerful Ether skill, as well as eventually the Ragnar sword, which is probably the best weapon in the game, I think is pretty fair to say, it's certainly not going to hurt to make sure that this guy gets some extra love. Number four, and again, this is one for classic Fire Emblem fans to be more aware of. It's maybe not always relevant in the newer games, but the weapon triangle is in full effect here. Of course, this means that swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. If you have the advantageous weapon in a battle, you'll get extra accuracy, evade, and damage, and of course, if you have the disadvantageous weapon, then the opposite will be true. For some characters who are either particularly tanky or particularly accurate or just strong in their own right, like again, say Titania, then this won't be too much of an issue for you, but for other characters that maybe don't have as much accuracy or a little more fragile and need to dodge every hit that they can or just take that little bit less damage, making sure that you're matching the weapons properly is going to be very useful for you, especially early on, where everything is a little bit tighter margins on whether you're going to live or die in any given fight or survive the enemy phase. It's much more likely that Ike is going to be able to handle 4 attacks from 4 enemy units if they all have axes and he has the weapon triangle advantage, for example. It's not the end-all be-all, especially compared to some other games in the franchise, but it is certainly something to be aware of as you're looking at enemy formations and figuring out your own movements to eke out that little bit of an extra advantage that can mean very big things over the course of any given battle. Number 5, the first third or so of the game will lock you to a very limited cast, but this does not mean that you should be afraid to drop a character if they're falling behind. So what do I mean by this? Well, for, again, the first 9-ish maps, you're going to largely have the same core roster of characters. Ike, Oscar, Boyd, Titania, Soren, and Riss. There'll be some other characters that come in and out, like Gatry and Shinon, and you'll get a couple of recruits as you start meandering through a little bit, such as Mia or Ileana, but it's not really until you get to, like, chapter 9, 10, and beyond that you start getting a decent amount of recruits pouring in. However, just because you are limited to this cast doesn't necessarily mean that you need to use every single one of them for the whole campaign, and that it's worth forcing it if someone is getting bad growths or just didn't get a bunch of levels in a particular map or the like. For example, I have always had very poor luck with Boyd. He's a very swingy character due to his use of axes. He needs to have good accuracy. He doesn't always get good skill ups. He also doesn't necessarily always get the strength or the speed or the defense that a frontline character needs, at least for me. So very often I'll see how he starts to level through the first few maps, and if I don't like what I see, I'll begin scaling back how much I use him in favor of other characters like Oscar and Ike getting the XP that Boyd could have been getting. This way they're able to snowball more, and I'm not putting effort and resources into a character that likely isn't going to keep up and perform over the rest of the campaign, especially once you start getting other characters who are perfectly viable for replacing them, such as, say, Kieran, the Axe Cavalry. Number 6, Laguz as units are gimmicky with relatively little support over the course of the game. If you are going to use one, they can be powerful, but I recommend generally just picking one. The Laguz are an evolution of these sort of Manakee units, or I guess you could say, quote-unquote, mechanic from the history of Fire Emblem, although even then it's really not a mechanic, it's just a special weapon type. But as one of the first iterations of this new type of unit in Fire Emblem, they're not super well realized. You have to manage a transformation bar, they're not able to fight when they're in their humanoid form, there's all sorts of weapons and magic that are effective against them, but if you do use them right and you know how to use them well, they can be very potent weapons in the right circumstances. However, due to the fact that the number of items that can allow them to instantly transform are quite limited, and the fact that they do get a generally low amount of XP over the course of maps, requiring more BEXP to be used on them to help them keep up, you need to be very sparing about how and when you use them and how many you have on your team. I personally, if I'm going to use a Laguz, especially in the early game, prefer Mordecai, as he is quite tanky and can hit very, very hard if you know how to use him. Maybe then either adding in one of the Hawk Laguz, like, say, Janaf, or Rayson if you want to use him as a dancer, or maybe just swapping out entirely and removing Mordecai from the team to use one of those if I don't want to have 2 or more Laguz on the team. It's not going to be the end of the world, but it can generally make your army management a little bit more tricky and cause you to have to focus more on how you're using them on any given map to get the most out of them, so you probably want to keep it fairly limited as a sort of specialist unit type. Number 7, Path of Radiance is a game that really enjoys you having a few select sweeper or carry characters that are going to be the main backbone of your force until you start to get near the end of the game and you have plenty of XP and BEXP to go around to catch everyone up. In the early game, the most common characters that people like to choose are characters like Titania, Ike, and Oscar, who can make a very powerful core and generally tend to level quite well. We mentioned sometimes Ike needs a little bit of help. I've actually had some issues with Oscar with strength growths as well, but I've played the game like 20 times, so there's going to be outstanding issues with some characters some of the time, right? Does it have to be those characters? Absolutely not. If you like Boyd and he works out well for you, you can use him. As you start to unlock some other characters, like, again, Kieran, Marcia, you can start using them as frontline main carry characters as well. Regardless of who you choose, you want to have that core of your team to build around. The auto includes in any given map, and then you can build the rest of your support cast or other characters you kind of swap in and out as you go from there. Speaking of which, number 8. There are many quote-unquote training project units in Path of Radiance that require a lot of investment to catch up to your team and come online. If you're familiar with games such as Fire Emblem 7, Blazing Sword, or Fire Emblem 8, Sacred Stones, then you'll know these characters as either trainees, or maybe Ests, or Ninos, that type of character. They generally come in very underpowered, low level, but have a lot of growth potential that makes it so if you do get them caught up with the rest of your team, they'll become very, very potent. Some of the most common characters in this category, in my opinion, would be Mia, Marcia, Rolf, Astrid, and Nefine. All of these characters can, if given the care and attention that they need, become absolute powerhouses. Even Rolf, who always gets me laughed at, but always absolutely slays out if he's given the opportunity to get some levels and get caught up. If you are going to use any of these characters, I recommend really just choosing one, maybe two, similar to the Laguz situation, to be able to really let them get the XP and the focus that they need, while your other more standard carry characters are just doing their thing and maybe don't need as much help. This way you won't overtax your resources. You won't find yourself running out of forges and BEXP, stuff we'll talk about a little further in the video, and can really give them that attention that they need to get their full potential, because otherwise, what's the point? Number 9, and this is another classic of the Fire Emblem franchise, use staves every turn when possible so that your healers can keep up in XP. This has always been an issue, but especially with earlier Fire Emblems, your healers are very potent. They can do a lot of support for you, and potentially, if they promote, can do even more. However, getting them to that point, especially without burning all of your bonus XP, can be quite the challenge if you aren't constantly having them take actions to heal and support your allies. Generally speaking, you're only getting 10 to 20 XP per staff use, meaning that you need anywhere from 5 to 10 actions just to get one level. Compare that to a heavy frontline fighter like, again, Ike or Oscar, who can potentially slay out multiple enemy units in one turn and get that whole level in one go, and you can see how they can start to fall behind. However, if over the course of every single mission you have basically every action they take be using some sort of staff, and they'll be able to keep up decently well. In particular, I recommend the ward staves that you'll either be able to find as treasure or enemy drops, sometimes in the shop, because you don't really need to be boosting ally resistance most of the time. There's not that many mages on any given map, and it's fairly easy to avoid them with your low-res characters, but what it does mean is that's 15 uses of free XP that you can just dump into your healer without having to necessarily use up your much more valuable heal, mend, etc. staves. These are basically just bundles of XP, and as such very valuable for you to pick up and use whenever you're able to. Number 10, and this is mainly aimed at you new heads who are more used to some of the latter games in the franchise, like Awakening, Fates, etc. Don't spam support conversations. Unlike those latter games, you are limited to 5 whole conversations, not 5 support chains, 5 conversations per character. And you need 3 conversations to reach max rank, which is A rank in this game, and get the maximum support boost. There's really not much else to say beyond that, and it will be something that's pointed out in the menu as well, but it's a very easy trap to fall into if you're used to the way supports work in the newer games, and kind of not realize that you've maybe messed up some of your characters a little bit in terms of how much you can optimize them by supporting each other and getting the best boosts possible. In relation to this, number 11, deploy characters you want to support in battle together constantly. Supports build up for each battle characters are deployed in together, and each pair requires a different number of battles to reach the next tier. For example, it takes Oscar and Ike 5 battles to reach their C support, 8 to reach B, and 11 to reach A. There are some potentially very potent combinations of characters out there due to the different elements that they have for their support conversations, but it might take them a very long time to be able to build those supports. So, if you want to get the maximum out of particular pairs in your team, make sure that they are always being deployed together whenever possible, so you can get those supports online as quickly as possible. It's literally just free stats so long as they're fighting near each other, so why would you not take advantage of that, right? Speaking of free stats, forged weapons in Path of Radiance are very potent and, if you know what you're doing, not particularly expensive, but you can only make 1 per map, so do so whenever possible or as needed. Forging a new weapon for a character essentially allows them to have a much higher damage attack or higher accuracy attack, etc., with a much lower rank weapon than they would if they were just buying a stock version of it from the armory, and it can absolutely make the difference between some weaker characters being able to deal any damage at all, let alone get kills, and actually get the XP that they need to become more powerful going forward. It also can make the difference in actually dealing with some bosses, especially as you get later in the game, so having more of these forged weapons on hand will just be a net positive for you. Considering how many different weapons and items and how much money you get over the course of the game, it's not too scary forging whenever possible, especially if you know how to optimize your forges, so do make sure that you're doing it. And speaking of which, number 13, to reduce costs for forging, only forge the needed stats. You pretty much always want to max out might, with one exception we'll talk about in a second, followed by accuracy if needed for the character, if they have low skill or it's a low accuracy type weapon in the first place, or you want to have something on hand to be able to deal with particularly dodgy characters like Myrmidons or Crows. Next, you really only want crit if you expect this character to be a major sweeper or their class gives them bonus crit, like giving extra crit on a forged weapon for a Swordmaster is great because they already get extra crit to begin with. And finally, you should really only be messing with the weight stat of a weapon if it needs to be reduced because a character is either low strength and as such is losing attack speed due to having a heavy weapon, or you just absolutely need that character to double at all times possible, even if they're not necessarily at risk of dying because they're going to get doubled. There is a niche case to be made for either making a weapon massively heavier to intentionally have a character not be able to double, or to reduce the damage on a weapon, or maybe even both, to make it so that certain high power characters like Titania won't get as many kills and can then let those enemy units that they've fought survive, so that your weaker characters can mop them up and get more XP than they otherwise would have. It's a niche case, but it can be a useful one, especially if you're really leaning into having Titania be that sort of escort character to baby your other units to success. Number 14, most skills in this game are absolutely garbage and not worth using. There are some that are extremely strong, of course, like Adept for bonus attacks, Wrath for extra crit, and as far as occult scrolls are concerned, Aether to just do a massive amount of extra damage and get health back, or Astra to just get 5 attacks for free. But while those skills are absolutely stellar, they are the exception, not the rule. If a skill isn't just a raw damage boost or a different interesting utility piece for a particular build that you're doing for a character, it's probably pretty safe to remove it and make room for other more effective skills. For example, Kieran's Gamble being an absolutely dog tier one that you can get rid of immediately in favor of basically anything else. Or if you do have a scroll for a skill that you can't see any possible use for, that just seems outright bad, just sell it, get some profit, use those funds for like forging more weapons or buying important staves or something like that. Number 15, when using bonus experience, consider save scumming. And now look, listen, this is not something that I generally enjoy or support in moment-to-moment gameplay of any kind, unless you're doing some specific weird farm for something and you're trying to save yourself literal IRL time before, you finally leave this mortal coil. But in this specific case, it is actually very much worth doing and something that I would consider very important. The reason is getting an empty or bad level using bonus experience is far worse than getting a poor level during a battle. After all, at least in a battle, you're still making forward progress through the game, even if Oscar only gets like a point of res and a point of luck. Like, generally not a great level for him, but like you'll survive, right? And at least you can still probably move forward and finish the map. In the menu, where there's no progress being made and no risk, nothing being lost, other than taking a bad level for no benefit and wasting a limited resource, why wouldn't you just reload and try to get an at least marginally better result? Do I recommend going through and just spamming reload until you get a max level every time you use bonus XP on every character that you ever use it on? No, that's a giant waste of time and it's completely defeating the point of the system and breaking the game. If you want to, by all means, that's your prerogative, but not something that I would recommend. Instead, yeah, if you get an empty level or one stat on an important character, maybe consider reloading and seeing if you can get a better result on the next time. Number 16, raising weapon levels is a lengthy process and arm scrolls are extremely limited. As such, I recommend focusing on one type of weapon as a character's main proficiency and only using multiple different weapon types to fulfill particular utility needs. Being able to wield higher tiers of weapons is actually very beneficial as you move further and further into the game, as something like a silver sword is far and away much better than an iron sword, especially if you can forge one for your character to use. That is an ungodly amount of damage to be able to give to a character, but it doesn't matter if they can't use that type of weapon in the first place. As such, when you have characters like, say, Paladins, who once promoted can be given any one other weapon type, you still primarily just want to focus on whatever weapon they had when they were a Cavalier. Say, again, Oscar, as our example, uses lances, and then typically when he promotes, most people like to give him bows for the triangle attack with his brothers, or axes as a high damage option, etc. You generally don't want to then be spending your time splitting his attacks between both of those weapon types. If you do, he's far less likely to be able to use the most powerful weapon weapons in the game by the end game, and is generally going to be weaker as a result for a relatively low net utility boost by having multiple different weapon types available to him. In 99% of cases, it's going to be much better for him to just be much more proficient, if not a master in one weapon type, and then just having like, yeah, an iron bow on hand if he needs to snipe a flyer or like can't quite reach an enemy that he needs to do damage to. You know, it's utility situations like that, nothing crazy. Number 17, light magic can only be used by the healer Riss and only after he promotes. If you don't plan on promoting him as part of your main team, you can safely sell this magic for profit when you find it. I mean, it's basically what it says on the tin, right? Like, there's only one character that can use light magic. He can deal a lot of damage with it if you decide to use Riss that way, because he does get a lot of magic growth, but he's not exactly going to be a big sweeper. You're still primarily using him for healing anyway. You can actually sell light magic for a pretty decent profit. So really, even if you are using Riss, keep like one light tome on you, maybe two if he's going to be attacking a lot, and then ditch the rest, and you can use that money to, again, forge better weapons or buy more weapons for characters that attack a lot and break their gear, you know, that type of thing. Just going to be far more useful that way. And finally, number 18, on escape maps, ensure your entire army escapes before Ike. You get bonus XP for each ally that does so. This is just one example of different ways that you can earn bonus XP on various different maps, depending on what objectives and gimmicks there are that are going on. But it's one that I see people miss very often, as it's not always directly shouted out or pushed in your face, compared to some other maps where it's very obviously stated, like, escape this prison without alerting the guards and it'll be good for you, and then you get like a ton of BEXP as a result. Or, hey, these Laguz are fighting against their will. If you leave them alive, it'll probably be good for you, and you get a bunch of bonus XP. Just going, hey, I can get all of my guys to the escape point and have Ike be like a good leader who watches out for his troops before he leaves, you know, commander taking care of his own, who would have thought, can get you just that little extra bump of XP per character that gets retreated ahead of him. It's a nice little boost, and considering how valuable and how important BEXP is in this game, it's an easy thing to miss, and one that there's really no reason for you to. You're just missing out on a valuable resource if you do not do this, so make sure that you do this. And that, my friends, is 18 tips for new players and returning players for Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. There is a ton that I could talk about with this game. There is so much detail that you can go into with specific characters, ways of leveling, item usage, all the different bonus objectives for different maps that give you more or less bonus experience, yada, yada, yada. There is so much that can be talked about, but I wanted to get this out here as soon as I could to make sure that there's more resources out there for people to be able to use to get into and enjoy this absolutely phenomenal game. If you enjoyed this or found it useful and you'd like me to talk about more topics in regards to the playing of Path of Radiance or just discussing it in general, do please let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to make more videos covering topics that you guys would like to see, and it helps me to know what you're interested in as well. And of course, from a selfish side of things, I'm always happy to talk about Fire Emblem. I really, really love Fire Emblem, so give me an excuse to do so, and I will, absolutely. If you have any other general tips that you think other people should know, feel free to drop them in the comments. If there's anything that you feel I should have touched on and I did not hear, let me know that as well. Hopefully we'll see some nice, healthy, calm, collected, polite conversation in the comments. With that said, though, I think we can wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.